people will not excuse or tolerate such arrogance and greed. The road to recovery demands that we all act responsibly, from Main Street to Washington to Wall Street.
You had some people on Wall Street who took these unbelievable risks with other people's money. It's also imperative that those in Wall Street boardrooms and on trading floors be held accountable for the decisions that they make.
President Obama criticizing those he famously called fat cat bankers on Wall Street, the very same people he blamed for the financial crisis. Now, it appears, one of them will likely be our next Treasury Secretary. The president's nominee for that post is none other than Jack Lew, the current White House Chief of Staff and former executive at Citibank, perhaps the most troubled of the too-big-to-fail banks and recipient of a $45 billion taxpayer bailout. Wall Street Journal assistant editorial page editor James Freeman has been looking into Mr. Lew's time at Citibank. So first, let's put this in context for viewers. Citibank was a particularly big player in the financial crisis.
Yeah, that's right. Really one of the banks at the center of the mortgage meltdown. In 2007, Citi was one of the first to have difficulties when they had been managing these off-balance sheet vehicles to invest in mortgages. Those started to go south. They ended up at the end of that year having to take them in-house again and stand behind them, which put a lot of financial pressure on the firm. But I think this is really going to be a test, this nomination, of whether Americans are still outraged about the bailouts.
All right. So, and they had a $45 billion taxpayer capital injection,
that's
as
right,
well as a guarantee, a federal guarantee of more than $300 billion in bad loans. There's no question in your mind that Citibank would have failed without federal intervention?
The question, I think it would have. The question in my mind is whether they should have let it fail. And
we urged it at the time that it do so, and Sheila Bair, the FDIC chair at the time, did as well. But of course, she was opposed by other people in the administration. So let's get to Jack Lew and his role at Citibank. What was his job?
Well, maybe the most interesting one is in early '08, he takes the helm at what's called Citigroup Alternative Investments that ran hedge funds, ran some of these exotic off-balance sheet vehicles, had just taken them in-house when he came on board. It was basically a unit that if it wasn't the inspiration for the Volcker rule that wanted to stop big banks gambling with taxpayers' money, it easily could have been. It was a disaster. The losses were enormous.
Okay, but the defense of him would be, look, he came on that in 2008. All the bad decisions had already been made. So, I mean, you can't blame Jack Lew for things that other bankers at Citigroup did.
Well, okay, but he's now setting himself up. He is now the...
Is that fair, though? I mean, is that a fair point in his defense?
Well, it's fair that certainly a lot of mistakes were already made. A lot of the bad bets were already made. Whether they could have... made some different decisions starting in early '08, possibly. But I think the key issue for him is his job as Secretary of the Treasury would be, now after Dodd-Frank, the 2010 law, would be basically being in charge of spotting risks in the financial marketplace. He is running something called the Financial Stability Oversight Council if he becomes Treasury Secretary. And this is deeming certain companies systemically important, identifying risks to the financial system. Was he able to identify any risks at Citigroup?
Did he see the iceberg coming, and why would he join something a unit if it was already headed for the rocks?
Now, and so what is the answer? Was he clueless? He had no idea the risks they were running? Or is he going to say, no, I saw the risks, and if so, why didn't you say anything? I don't remember him being a big whistleblower in early 2008. I don't think anyone else does either. So there are difficult questions for him, and of course, this was not his first job at Citi. In '06, when he first started there, he ran their private wealth. He was a chief operating officer at their wealth management division. And big questions there, too.
Because they've been sued for selling what are alleged to have been bad assets that they knew were bad, and that's a lawsuit that is going through the courts right now.
Well, they've paid $85 million in settlements, an undisclosed number of other private settlements. They're going to be paying more. And the question is, what did he think? Were they mistreating customers? Were they pushing people into risky mortgage and municipal bond investments without properly disclosing it?
Well, how big an issue is this going to be at his confirmation?
Well, I think this is a question. I think it ought to be a big issue because he ostensibly was overseeing their legal affairs, which really relates directly to disclosure.
You know,
now,
we've argued, though, that you can't hold bankers responsible by themselves for this. That the federal government had a big role to play in it.
Right. What we said, look, there's greed on Wall Street. There was greed in 2008. There always has been. That's a part of this story. It's not the whole story. There are a lot of regulatory mistakes that got us here. But to say that someone shouldn't be prosecuted is different than saying he ought to be the Secretary of the Treasury. He ought to have the most important job in international finance.
And at least his experience and expertise ought to be challenged.
And I think it will be. Obviously, the Senate is very focused on Chuck Hagel. Once they move on to Jack Lew, could be some questions.
Okay, James, thanks so much. Still ahead.